Hallelujah, Christ is risen. Hallelujah. Well, dearly beloved people of God, it is now the second Sunday in this season of resurrection, of Easter life. And again, we are being drawn as God's people into the eternal feast of the Christ who has conquered death, whose persistent love is with us always. And in this second Sunday of the season, we have before us one of the prominent post-resurrection stories of Jesus as told in John's Gospel. Of course, this is commonly referred to as the Doubting Thomas story, right? But I think that name is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, yes, this gospel story does recall this moment in which Thomas is having a hard time trusting in the testimony of what Mary has said and what the disciples have told him, that Christ has indeed risen and has appeared. Yes, it does say that Thomas won't believe until he can see and feel for himself Christ's own resurrected body. So yeah, the story is on some level about Thomas, but it's also about much more than just Thomas's experience. For how does the story today begin? It begins by saying, when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, that is the day Christ was resurrected, the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked, it said, for fear of the Jews. After all that had just happened in their lives, after all that the disciples had just walked through, they went back to that house where they intended to meet and locked the doors because they were afraid of what might happen next. Even though Mary Magdalene had just met the resurrected Christ in the garden by the tomb earlier that morning and had told them about it, even though Peter had run and seen the empty tomb, even though Jesus had even told them time and again that this is the way things were going to happen, the disciples were still afraid, still fearful, still willing to remove themselves from the society that they no longer felt safe in. Which on the one hand is understandable. They had been deeply wounded by leaders of the faith community that had birthed them. They had been betrayed by one of their own. There was violence in the world around them that they could not control, and the world was changing way more rapidly than they thought they could handle. But on the other hand, they have been God's beloved people forever. And they had just been the recipients of this testimony of resurrection via Mary, whom Jesus had sent them. And forever they've been the people who had eaten at Jesus' table, who were washed in his bowl, whom Jesus prayed for in the midst of his own betrayal. And now they've locked themselves back in this house that they might shrink into perpetual seclusion and just remember the good old days and how things used to be. Well, it seems Jesus will have none of that sort of thing. For the resurrected Jesus blows past their locked doors, blows past their erected walls of fear, and finds them there in the midst of it all, and shows them his wounded body, reorienting them again to the divine vulnerability that has been undertaken so that a new sort of courage might emerge within them. And then he then sends them out to be God's beloved people in the world who take that risk for the sake of the lives of others as well. Peace be with you, he says, as he breathes the Holy Spirit upon them. Peace be with you, he says. As God has sent me, so I send you. If you choose to forgive sins of others, they are forgiven. If you choose to hold their sins against them, they will be held. Peace be with you, he says, as he breathes that Holy Spirit upon them. And so it is with us as well. where Christ breathes that Holy Spirit on us too. We may not be privy to an appearance like that we hear of in John's Gospel today, of a mystical risen Jesus who shows up in bodily form when our most fearful moments of life render us paralyzed. We may not have that experience, but we are promised that Christ's real presence will always be found here in this meal around this table, where we are reminded again and again of the deep, abiding love and forgiveness that, paired with service of others, fills us in ways that bread alone cannot. For even though we, like Thomas, struggle to show up when things get tough, even though we have a hard time trusting the testimony of those whom Christ has sent us to proclaim resurrection, whether that be the testimony of women, or those of us who are trans, or people of color, or our Muslim neighbors, even though we literally lock our doors in fear and huddle in the same groups that we've always felt safe with, Jesus meets us here again and again with his risen body that breaks down those fears and those walls and sends us out to spread the love of God against the world, for such love will never be stopped. For this is where Jesus reminds us that sin and death will never have the last words for our lives. For much is at stake and much life is yet to come. Which may mean that we still live in some fearful moments. Which may mean that we make the wrong decisions as we go. But if this story from the gospel today reminds us of anything, perhaps it reminds us that no matter what fear grips us, what doubt takes hold of us, what unwillingness paralyzes us, Christ will not let such things hold us back from being the people God has already made us to be. People who are washed in Christ's water. People who are fed with Christ's own body. People who lean in and listen and trust and respond to those voices who lead us in the way of resurrection life always. So come, dear people. Come to this table today. Come and eat. Come and feast. Come and respond to this call to be part of the world that God so deeply loves. For this is the feast of victory for our God. Alleluia. Alleluia.